Welcome to the Fortified Life podcast, where we learn how to develop a dependency on Jesus in the marketplace. From the boardroom to the bathroom, God is with you. Here's our host, author, speaker, teacher, encourager, stewardship coach, and my husband, the man they call Mr. Fortified, Jason Davis.
Hey, what's going on, everybody? Jason Davis, a.k.a. Mr. Fortified, your host of the Fortified Life podcast. We're back for another exciting episode. Here on the Fortified Life, we are passionate about developing a dependency on Jesus in the marketplace. Ladies and gentlemen, I got to tell you, I'm really excited for our guest this week because he has written some extremely insightful books. I know I'm a fan. There's one in particular, we'll get to this a little bit later, that I read that really impacted me. But before I bring him on, let me introduce him to you. Dr. Paul White is a Christian psychologist, author, and speaker who makes work relationships work. Dr. White is the co-author of the best-selling book, The 5 Languages of Appreciation in the Workplace, which has sold over 575,000 copies. Written with Dr. Gary Chapman, author of the #1 New York Times bestseller, The 5 Love Languages, and has been translated into 25 languages. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome to the Fortified Life, Dr. Paul White. Dr. White, how's it going, sir?
Good. Thanks for having me, Jason. I'm glad to be here.
Absolutely. Well, Dr. White, we know that everything God has graced you to do in your bio, we know that you didn't just wake up and all of a sudden and get to where you are. So maybe kind of take us on a little journey professionally, if you will.
Sure. So I grew up outside of Kansas City in Lawrence, where the University of Kansas is. So I'm a Jayhawk fan. So got to throw that in there.
There you go.
I grew up in the context of a family-owned business, which had impact later. And wound up going to Wheaton College in Chicago, West Chicago. Met my wife there. Was actually a Christian ed Bible major and moved to Phoenix to work with house churches there in the early 80s, back in the prior millennia. And while doing that, God led me into the area of counseling. And so I got my master's in counseling at Arizona State and worked with kids and families there, then moved to Atlanta and got my PhD at Georgia State, and then moved back to Kansas to be closer to family and finish my training here, and wound up working with families and kids, developed a specialty of testing students that have learning difficulties, including ADHD and dyslexia and that kind of stuff. And then sort of mid-career, because of my background of working, living in the context of family-owned business, some business friends of mine who were consulting kept running into family issues because 85% of the companies in the U.S. are family-owned, even the big ones. And so I wound up traveling around the country working with successful families and family businesses, dealing with the family issues that are intertwined with working together and then business succession, that kind of stuff. And it was in the midst of that I was working with a family in North Carolina and talking to the dad, who was the CEO. And I said, how's the succession plan going? He says, it's going well. My son's stepping up. I think it's going to work. I walk across the hall and ask his son the same question. And he says, this is a disaster. It's never going to work. I can't ever please my dad. And which I could identify with. And at the same time, my wife and I were reading The 5 Love Languages by Dr. Chapman. And I thought, I wonder if this could, work in workplace relationships. So I pursued Dr. Chapman and pitched the idea, and he agreed to work with me. And we started out by developing our online assessment, and then some training materials, started using that, and then wrote the book after that, and have continued to do that. So it's been a good journey.
Love that. Thank you for elaborating, Dr. White. You said something interesting. Did you say 85% of workplace issues? So say that stat again.
85% of all the companies in the U.S. are family owned.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Family owned. And then when you're talking about in the context of family owned businesses, the different issues that arise, in your opinion and your research, what are some of the patterns that you noticed?
Well, actually there's a model sort of, if you think about the Olympic circles, those 5 circles that, overlap, there's a model of three circles, family businesses, that there's the ownership issues, who owns it, who gets to make decisions and all that, who runs it, the management circle, and then the family circle, and those three overlap. And the biggest challenges are when, you've got people in multiple circles, early on, lots of times the mom and the dad are the owners and the managers and the family, right? And then maybe the business grows and they have other managers, and then kids or somebody or uncle works in it. And there's different rules for communication and decision making for businesses versus families. In a business, the owner gets to call the shot ultimately. But in a family, hopefully that's not the way, that there's collaboration and discussion. And so working those roles out and figuring out, who's talking who. I used to sit and listen to my dad and my brother talking. One point, my dad's talking to him like CEO to manager, and he could tell him what to do. But then the next moment, he might say, well, this is why I want you, where we're going to go on vacation. And my brother was married, and had kids, and, telling an adult child what to do for vacation isn't appropriate. So just the mix-ups that happen in that kind of setting.
Wow. Dr. White, you're just kind of highlighting, number one, it's an honor to be able to own a business, but then there's different dynamics, especially working with family. Dr. White, if you will, I'd like to go back to that moment you proposed the idea to Dr. Chapman. So you're reading the 5 love languages, and many have read that book, but you read it, you were imprinted. And what was that like when you pitched the idea to him, and give us a little background on how the 5 languages of appreciation in the workplace came to be?
Yeah, well, a little background story. It actually took me a year to get to Dr. Chapman. He had what I called the nicest bulldog assistant that just protected him, and I just kept calling and emailing, and finally he came to the town where I lived and was doing a marriage seminar, and so I got a half hour with him and pitched the idea. And he had said that he had already had, 20 or 25 other people pitch the same idea, but hadn't felt comfortable with that. And the fact that I was a psychologist, so I had the relational side, the fact that I was working with businesses, obviously that I was a follower of Christ. And then probably the kicker was that we both attended Wheaton College, and that sort of was like the shoehorn that got me in a little bit. So I'm thankful for that. But so pitched the idea, and he said, he just finished writing a book with somebody else. He's done that, and he really wasn't interested, but he said, why don't you go ahead and we'll start working on the assessment. And so we talked, we wound up having follow-up phone calls and so forth, and decided that appreciation was probably the most equivalent concept in the workplace, because we didn't feel like trying to talk about love for secular workplaces really fit. And so we started that idea and worked on it, and did a pencil and paper version and tried it out and got feedback, and sort of went from there.
And see, folks, the alumni network is real.
It is real. That is real.
I love that, Dr. White. When you talked about, you pitched the idea and then you're writing the book, but the assessment was a huge piece and a resource. How does the assessment pair with the book with talking about this topic?
So the assessment's called the Motivating by Appreciation Inventory. We call it the MBA inventory for short. And it's online assessment that is developed over time. We've had just reached 400,000 people have taken it worldwide. Wow. And it's in 9 languages right now. And it identifies a person's primary preferred language of appreciation. So whether that's words of affirmation or quality time or one of the others, their secondary language. So you could use those 2 together in how to communicate. Your least valued language, which is sort of your blind spot. It's the one you don't think about because it's not that important to you. Mm-hmm. And so you have team members that have that language, and you got to sort of pay attention to that or you'll miss them. And then we found out that in the workplace, just knowing a person's appreciation language wasn't sufficient, that you also needed to know the specific actions because it changes. So like quality time, found that really there's sort of a age or generational difference, that older people like myself and older employees quality time is sort of like focused attention with somebody that you really value, like maybe your manager or supervisor. But for younger employees, it's more collegial relationships, getting together with your peers and hanging out, going to lunch or going out after work. And so, I tell older leaders, I say, just because you have a team member who has quality time doesn't mean they want time with you. I mean, you may be wonderful, you may be great, but they want to hang out with their friends. And so we developed that. And then over time, we've developed different specific versions for different workplace settings. So a medical version, government version, school, for professional trades like carpentry, plumbing, and so forth, the military, remote workers, because what happens is the actions look different, right? An act of service in a school might be watching a teacher's kids at lunch recess so she can go get caught up on paperwork or make some phone calls. An act of service in a trade setting might be show up at the end of the day and help them clean up the job site, right? So we wanted to specify it to the different work settings so it made sense.
Wow. That sounds like a powerful assessment, Dr. White. Let's book club for a second, Dr. White, because we've been talking and we've been setting it up for the 5 languages of appreciation. What I noticed in the reading of this, Dr. White, is you start out with what employees want most. And I think that's where you start to get in the idea of the appreciation. So as the way the book is laid out, what employees want, and then you step into the different languages. Why is that such a big thing in the workplace? What employees desire most?
Well, I as a follower of Christ, I think it's rooted in how God made us. I mean, God is made to be worshiped and adored. And I think there's a part of us that we want to be valued, not that we should be worshiped, obviously, but that, we should be valued for who we are. And I think as Christians in the workplace, that really makes sense. I mean, humanists and other people sort of, can get into appreciation, but they don't have a really good reason, I don't think. But we're made in the image of God. And so one of the things that this does is it allows us to value people even when they're not performing like we would like, because employee recognition is largely about performance. I mean, you get, recognized or award or reward. But there's times in our lives that sometimes we're not performing like we should. And it doesn't mean we don't have value. It doesn't mean we don't need encouragement. And so we really believe that you can show appreciation to people for non-work related issues. I mean, whether that's, I have a colleague or a team member here who's just funny and got a fun laugh and cheerful. And I just really enjoy having her around for that. We've still got to get work done, right? But, there's that. Or there are times, my wife and I have 4 kids that are adults now, but we had twins first and we were away from family. It was stressful, man. And I was not the best worker. And I didn't need somebody to set goals for me. I just need some support, Yeah. And so sometimes it's more about, hey, Dimitri, man, I'm really impressed with the self-discipline you have for training for a half marathon. That's cool. Or to Marta and say, man, I am just so impressed with how much you love your kids and committed to them. It's not about work, but it's about valuing them. And that's going to create a sense of loyalty, of connectedness that we really need in the workplace.
Wow. That is so insightful, Dr. White. Just be understanding the differences and understanding how we're wired as human beings. Another part in the book that I thought was really interesting, Dr. White, there's a lot of focus, of course, in the business world, but maybe this was kind of a nod to the nonprofit space. And you had a chapter that talked about how volunteers need appreciation too. Why did you and Dr. Chapman believe hey, we need to include something about volunteers as well?
Well, I mean, Dr. Chapman's a pastor. He was for 50 years, associate pastor, and involved in churches and ministries. And one of the biggest challenges is finding volunteers and keeping volunteers to, whether it's for Sunday school or youth ministry or whatever it might be. And we know that when people feel valued, they stay longer, whether that's work or volunteering. And so it makes sense to be able to find out how to encourage or show appreciation to the volunteers in your ministry or nonprofit, so that you're not spending most of your time looking for new people, right? It's so that's sort of the nexus of that.
Yeah, that is huge. So those of you, our listeners, we've had folks on in the past, leaders of nonprofit organizations. So no matter your classification, employee, board member, volunteer, you are seen and loved, and you're part of this research. So thank you for pointing that out, Dr. White. Dr. White, we've been talking about the assessment and the 5 languages of appreciation, but you also wrote another book called the Vibrant Workplace. You've talked about the people, but then culture is a big part of an organization. So talk to us about your goal with that book and just the importance of building organizational culture.
Yeah, that book I wrote as a follow-up to the 5 languages of appreciation, because as we worked with organizations and businesses, there's always sticking points or challenges that you find as you apply things, and sort of found it's organized around sort of the 10 most common challenges or issues you have to overcome, and how to do that. So that can either be, a lack of support from top-level management. And to be honest, most of the companies and organizations that work with us, we start in the middle. It's very rare that we start at the top. It's somebody that's a department head or maybe a division manager or something, and they find our stuff and want to use it with their team. And so we start there. Another challenge is pushback from supervisors. And the pushback is, when do I have time to do this, right? Mm-hmm. And so we talk about really when your team members feel valued and appreciated, you actually have more time because you're spending less time on dealing with the stupid little things that get in the way of somebody complaining about, what size their monitor is, or whether they got a window and where their parking spot is, or conflict over little things, or not showing up, not calling in, coming in late. Those things, when people feel valued, those tend to sort of fall away. And so you've got more time. The other thing we say is, we're not here to create another to-do list for you. You got enough to do. Most people already got 2 to-do lists, right? So it's not that we're going to make an appreciation to-do list, but we're going to teach you how to show appreciation in the ways that you're probably already doing or almost doing, and tweak it a little bit so that it's effective, and that you find out. So really, the assessment is to find out how each person wants to be shown appreciation. So you do the action that they want versus writing notes to everybody or checking in with everybody. That's a waste of time because not everybody wants a note. Not everybody wants you to stop by, So it's about becoming more effective. Another challenge is just, difficult to appreciate colleagues. There are some people that are just sort of grumpy and, a little prickly. And what do you do with that? Well, one thing is you don't try to fake it, because that just undermines any sense of trust. And we talk about that. One of the things is just to get to know the person a little bit better, because what you do, find out a little more, maybe why they react the way they do, or why they seem a little bit distant, or if they came from a tough background and it makes sense that they're protective, or you find some touchstones with them that, like you and I lived in Atlanta in the past, and so then you've got something to talk about and get to know them.
Absolutely. Dr. White, where can people get a copy of the 5 languages of appreciation and the Vibrant Workplace? Yeah,
you can get them on Amazon. We have a website where I think almost always you can get a better deal. It's website's appreciationatwork.com, and it's a word at, so appreciationatwork.com. And we've got our books. We've got 5 books, some about toxic workplaces. We've got codes to take the assessment. When you buy the book, it actually has a code in the back that allows you to take the basic version of our inventory. But if you want other ones, you can purchase those. Or I grew up professionally in the not-for-profit and social service world where people give a lot, but they don't have a lot of money for training. And so I wanted to create some low-cost training material. So we have an appreciation work implementation kit that you can use with your team or teams to take people through. So that's the best place to start, probably.
Excellent. Folks, you heard straight from the author. You know where to go get the resources. Well, Dr. White, you teed us up with the two books and your research and with people and your background with family-owned businesses. We also know as a man of faith, your faith informs everything that you do. If there's one or two that maybe sticks out in your mind, what was a big turning point in your faith?
Well, I grew up, fortunately, I was blessed to grow up in a home where my family of parents and grandparents were believers and grew up going to church. In high school, I really got challenged to give my life to Christ versus just sort of, believing intellectually but not obeying. And so, and during that time, there was a group called Campus Life. It's sort of like Young Life. And the leader discipled me for a couple of years and really poured into me and got me going, more steady that way. And then interesting experience at Wheaton, you have to take a summer course off campus, and they have different ones. And I was privileged to be able to go overseas and study in Israel and Greece and Turkey and Asia Minor, biblical history and archaeology. And we were based in Jerusalem, and where we were right down the street from like a Coptic monastery from Ethiopia, Catholic monastery, Greek Orthodox, all these different traditions. And I came from a pretty conservative, evangelical, narrow kind of way of sort of defining what a disciple was. And it just blew my boxes up because I'm like, how can I say that my way of following Christ is better than these people? Because I was born in the Midwest in the U.S. in 1900s, and they're born, in Africa or wherever. And so God just impressed me that, if you, confess that Jesus is Lord, he came, he lived here, he died for our sins, he rose, and he ascended and coming back. That's it, man. That's what we can fellowship, at least from my point of view. They may not be able to fellowship with me, but, it really gave freedom to be able to be gracious to people that come from different backgrounds and traditions, which has been fun.
Amen to that, Dr. White. Now, Dr. White, as in looking at the future, and I understand you're constantly doing research and writing, so I understand if you can't give us all the details, but is there anything new that you're working on or researching that you're looking forward to later on in 2024?
Yeah, there's two things. One is I spent a large part of earlier 2023 rewriting the book, The 5 Language Appreciation. And so I updated the research. There's a whole chapter in chapter 2, sort of like the ROI, the return on investment for business leaders of appreciation and all the good things that happen. I mean, one of the misconceptions business leaders have is that appreciation is about making people feel good. That'd be nice if that happens, but we know that what happens is you become a more functional, effective organization because people show up, there's less conflict, less absenteeism, less staff turnover for sure, better able to recruit new employees, performance goes up, customer service ratings go up. So there's research coming out, so I updated that. And then the prior version came out in 2019, so prior to COVID. So I rewrote the chapter on remote and hybrid workers and brought in the research for that. So that's coming out in January, so I'm excited about that. And then I'm currently involved in, I said I've got the inventory in like 9 languages, compiling data, getting data from people who've taken it in Chinese, and they're largely in China, Canadian French, Spanish speakers, and sort of seeing the difference of patterns of appreciation. For example, in the U.S., about 50%, 45% of people choose words as their primary language. So it's less than half, but it's a big group. In Singapore, I have some trainers there. And in Singapore, it's acts of service is the most important one to them because it's such a densely populated area and career competition is huge that anybody that helps you advance your career, it's really valuable to you. So looking forward to sort of those cross-cultural patterns and see if there's what differences exist.
Well, Dr. Wright, I got to tell you, I'm not in front of you every day, but that's getting me excited just hearing you talk about it. So, folks, make sure you keep up with all the wonderful things that Dr. White is working on, which leads us, Dr. White, before we get ready to go, people have heard about your books, your research. You've given us a tease about things to come. Where can people go to follow all the wonderful work that you're doing and the resources that you have?
Yeah, our sort of mothership website, that appreciationatwork.com, has a Learn tab that has all kinds of articles that we published, podcasts, videos. We've got an Appreciation at Work channel on YouTube. And then at the bottom of that page, if you're an academic or interested in that kind of stuff, we've got a link to all the research that we've done, because we try to be, evidence-based, and we are. So doing that. So that's really sort of the best place to sort of find out. I mean, follow me on LinkedIn. We publish articles and our newsletter and blog. If you go to our appreciationatwork.com website, I put out a weekly blog and newsletter, and that's got all the latest stuff. So you can sign up for it there.
Excellent. And folks, don't you worry. All these resources that Dr. White is talking about, we will have it in the show notes. So go to jerichoforce.com, go to the podcast show notes section. We'll have all of Dr. White's, the assessment, the mothership website, as he talked about, as well as the books. Well, Dr. White, I just want to say thank you for coming on the show. You have shared many nuggets of wisdom, and I believe listeners are going to have some things to really run with in 2024. But thank you so much for hanging out with us here on The Fortified Life.
You bet. My pleasure. I enjoyed it.
All right. Well, folks, that's all we have time for on this episode. But remember how we leave things. Don't compartmentalize your faith in the marketplace. And from the boardroom to the bathroom, God is with you. We'll see you next time on the Fortified Life podcast.
Thank you for listening to the Fortified Life podcast. You can catch us live on Wednesdays at 8:30 p.m. Eastern Time and on demand. Check out fortifieddlifepodcast.com for more details. To learn how to live out your faith in the marketplace, grab a copy of Jason Davis's book, Fortified, Being Rooted in God's Plan for Work and Business, available on Amazon.